All right, welcome everybody. We'll get started in just a moment here. We were dealing with some technical difficulties with one of our panelists. Brock, can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes. All right. So we've settled those issues just in time. So sorry about the delay, everyone. We'll get started here. It should still wrap up before the hour is over. Just want to cover a few technical things before we get started. This is Zoom webinar, not Zoom meeting. So functions very similarly with the exception that you cannot speak or be seen by default. So you can use the chat or the Q&A functions if you want to interact with the panel or with each other. For chat, make sure that you select everyone from the to drop-down menu in the chat box if you want everyone to see your message. Otherwise, only panelists will see it. Once we get to the comment and Q&A period, if there's something that will just be easier to say out loud, if you use the hand raise button, I'll unmute you in the order that you raised your hand and you can just speak at that point. You'll have the ability to unmute yourself by then. But during the main session, you'll remain muted. So without further ado, I want to hand it off to Rock.
Good afternoon. Thanks, Mike. Welcome to our AACRAO coffee break. I'm Rock McCaskill, current AACRAO board member and associate registrar at Clemson University. Joining me today are university registrar at North Dakota State University and current AACRAO board member Philip Hunt, and also AACRAO director of government relations, William Gill. The processing of VA educational benefits has been a challenge for our institutions, and recent regulations have not made those processes any easier. The purpose of today's coffee break is to continue to bring awareness to the issues and to engage the membership in conversations surrounding those issues. Phil is going to start us off, and then Bill will provide more background on AACRAO's engagement. After that, we'll have some time at the end for discussion and questions and answers. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil now, and we can get started.
Thank you, Rock. Appreciate that. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. While AACRAO is aware that not all registrars' offices has veteran certification and services within their portfolio, we do know that about 74% of registrars' offices are directly responsible, supervise, or help inform decisions related to this very important service area. And it's through various channels that the AACRAO board has been made aware that the implementation of these new regulations has been challenging, to say the least, to our membership, my university included. And we want to assure that we are advocating, we want you to be sure that we are advocating on your behalf. As such, AACRAO has been actively monitoring new and proposed legislation regarding veteran certification over the last several years. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce William Gill, AACRAO's Director of Government Relations.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Phil and Rock, for kind of bringing this up as an issue for AACRAO to kind of be engaged with at the board meeting. I know this came up during discussion, and through that kind of conversation, I was able to share with the board kind of how we've been engaged and what you guys came up with a great idea of having this coffee break. So it not only provides an update at kind of where we are with all these things that have been happening, but also kind of provides an opportunity for us to kind of share everything we've been engaged with regarding veteran legislation issues over the last 4 years. So as a little bit of background, let's go ahead, Mike. So kind of, this is go back, we've been engaged, basically, I started in February of 2017 with AACRAO, and literally, I think it was March or April, with the whole conversation regarding the Forever GI Bill started happening. We call it Forever GI Bill, but its full official name is the Harry Coleman Veterans Education Assistance Act. And it was one of the first things that our former executive director, Mike Riley, talked to me about. As Brock just mentioned, so many of the veteran support services are located within the registrar's office. So it's not just, reporting and FERPA and privacy and education records, but also incorporating veteran issues into our portfolio. So from the get-go, we've engaged in this Forever GI Bill. So we became part of this veteran group coalition. We were one of the few higher education associations engaged with veterans, the organizations. And really what the Forever GI Bill was just, it was like all these different acts, legislations that ranged, tremendously, but all were mainly focused on veterans issues. And so what they did was the Veteran Association started compiling all of it together, working with the appropriate House and Senate committees and trying to develop a large forever GI Bill instead of doing it piecemeal. We were, I remember being part of this huge table, probably around 60 associations. And we were one of them, again, one of the few education ones. It was held at the VFW's headquarters here in DC. So how we became engaged throughout the process is they shared with us the various pieces of legislation which would essentially be compiled to be the Forever GI Bill. And we then sent it to our public policy advisory group that's called PPAG to get feedback on the legislation. And again, that was in spring 2017. They reviewed over 30 pieces of legislation. Basically, they were fine with most of them, but there was some definite concern regarding providing priority enrollment to veterans that could be, because the premise of it would be to give veterans like student athlete status. And our comeback was that, this could be completely disruptive to an institution. And if some institutions are heavily veteran, so like there's really no reason for priority, other possibilities. And this is what conversations that AC and us had with committee staff is that, you could actually hurt other students as a result. A senior may need to get 1 or 2 classes in order to graduate and fill their curriculum for their credential. But if a veteran comes in and takes it and then removes the ability for that senior to be able to enroll, it just halts that education process. So they decided to, instead of making it, they're going to do a study. So we'll see what happens with that study. Again, then this bill went through the House really quickly in the Senate, and it was signed in August of 2017. And this is the largest at the time. This was probably is the largest piece of veteran legislation since 2001, when the post 9/11 GI Bill was passed. So it really was a big undertaking. Next one, Mike. And as a result of all this and us being part of it, and we kept on hearing little rumors about additional legislation regarding veterans, kind of to amend or to strengthen the Forever GI Bill. And so in spring of last year, we started hearing rumors of something called the Protect GI Bill. And so we started forming a coalition around in higher education with some other sister associations, such as obviously ACE, NACUBO, APLU, NICU, ASCU, kind of to bring a cohesive higher education voice, since each of us work with a different aspect of how such legislation would impact not just the SCOs, the school certifying officials. It does impact other ways, right? So in between the 2017 and 2020, we were able to, AACRAO members, put together something called a Veteran Reporting Work Group, which we did a report regarding the need to upgrade VA once. And but it also kind of provided AACRAO with kind of an ad hoc kind of group of SCOs, which for any kind of veterans issues, we could go directly to the folks who actually implement some of the requirements. And that, thank you. We are also engaged with NAVPA. As a matter of fact, I just got an email from Jan. So we're talking about a different issue with NAVPA. So so we shared it on the legislation. We got our hands on the legislation. We shared it with our various constituencies, and the work group really kind of focused on 3 large things, like the monthly enrollment verification requirement, the new overpayment collection responsibility that institutions would now have, and dual enrollment certification. So we started working with the members of the committee and specifically explain to them that that monthly enrollment verification process is really not required. Explain to them how institutions, when a veteran withdraws, institutions are required within 30 days to report that withdrawal to the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so it would just be, that you're doing double work, plus the nightmare of the SCOs having to work with VA once on a monthly basis would just be, really, really difficult, and not required, And so the other things that the legislation, as I mentioned, that higher ed kind of wrote to the committee formally, was that while dual certification, it became kind of a, and now we know it's a hot button issue, right? But at the time, from within the higher education, some institutions already do dual certification while others don't. And so there was really no consensus within the higher ed community of whether this was a big issue or not, because some people said, yeah, others said, like NICU said, no. So it's mentioned in the letter. And by the way, when I talk about letters and community, you can definitely go to our webpage and find copies of these letters. It required a dual certification. It also required the legislation of the Protect to end the practice of bad actor institutions who verify enrollment after the first day of the term, but to keep the entire tuition payment, even if for whatever reason the veteran decides not to withdraw. So it incorporated that. It also provided clarifications to what would be the triggers for risk-based review by SSAs or state approving agencies. Basically, the reviews would only be for those institutions subject to Department of Ed's quote unquote heightened cash monitoring level 2 payment method, basically institutions that have low cash flows. It also would, again, make colleges and universities responsible for repayment of overpayments, and then also required the institutions provide estimates of costs and aid for the entire duration of the student's program. So those were some of the issues we had with the legislation. We were able to get out the monthly enrollment verification requirement. So that was dropped from the final language of the bill based on our feedback and collectively, but also because of us and the SCOs. So, and then that we put all those issues into a community letter with 14 sister associations also signing on. And then the legislation was signed into law in December 2020. So will these slides be made available? Mike's mentioned that it will be recorded, and I'm happy to make these slides available to Mike or to anybody. All right, Mike, next one, please. So the bill passed in 2020, December. I should also note that the reconciliation bill of 2020 in December also basically also started to count GI Bill benefits towards the 90-10 rule. Previously, and for those who aren't familiar with 90-10 rule, it requires institutions to must receive an institution cannot receive more than 90% of their funding from the federal government or from the Department of Ed. But it withdrew. It still, they didn't count GI benefits, and so the provision that was inserted in 2020 in December, now GI benefits are also count towards the requirement of 90-10. So that's an important change that happens. If I'm sure people already know that. So the legislation is implemented, and almost immediately we start hearing concerns, such that the conversations around technical correction legislation is needed. And so we have seen two pieces of legislation. So this is kind of the action that's happened, and it's kind of all kind of coming up really, really fast because of the limited congressional calendar that's on there and its possible impact to student veterans. And so what we have right now is we have two pieces of legislation. One is the Student Veteran COVID-19 Protection Act, or HR 5509, and that is introduced by Chair Chicano, Congressman Trone, and Congressman Levin, all members of the Veteran Committee, and that's Democrat. We also have a Republican bill, which is introduced by Ranking Member Bost. So people ask, well, why two pieces of legislation? Well, it's how to pay for it. There are no issues with the actual language or the fixes. It's how these are going to get paid. The D legislation and Democrat would be paid via emergency funding, kind of like what being happened now via the supplementals and reconciliation bills, while the Republican legislation would require offsetting funds. So, and that's basically, and I'll talk a little bit about my recent communication around that and kind of what's holding things up. So what does this legislation, technical corrections, include? Basically, it extends certain COVID-related flexibilities granted to the Secretary of Department of Veterans Affairs, which are set to expire this December until June 2020. Basically provides more flexibility for institutions that are partially going online or fully going online or all that kind of stuff. And so that's one of the technical corrections. Also make the VA's incentive compensation provision the same to the incentive compensation provision in the HEA. So you don't have an institution would not have to basically try to monitor two incentive compensation provisions. It could be different. So now they're all tied to the language that over Department of Ed and they're governed by the HEA, the Higher Education Act. It also requires SAAs, or state approving agencies, to interpret VA's incentive compensation provision the same as the Education Department's interpretation. Again, it's making apples to apples, not apples to oranges. But also, so we're back to the second certification. Again, what we heard is that some institutions are doing this now, while other ones are not doing it. And so this is an orange. So working with the folks on the Hill, try to make it easier for for folks to be able to do what they do but still meet the regs and all that kind of stuff. It would allow the VA to waive the second certification requirement for institutions with flat rate tuition and fee structures. So when this legislation passed, be on the lookout for that. And also allows institutions to satisfy the Isakson row section 1018 consumer information by using Department of Education's college financing plan template. Remember, previously it was provide information regarding all fees, which change constantly, and so now the institutions can just use the Department of Education. And it also would includes language that expands the rounding out policy. And so kind of what's going on with rounding out is that basically this policy allows student veteran to supplement their degree-oriented courses with additional non-degree courses to retain full-time enrollment status. Basically, this serves students full monthly housing allowance, especially for their final semester. And however, this policy changed in August 1 to only allow enrollment in degree-related courses named in the school's course catalog and not previously completed. So the language that's in there would allow it to go back to the pre-August 1 interpretation of rounding out, which would allow final semester individual to be able to still utilize their housing and other GI benefits by not be forced to take specifically major related courses, and so they can take non-major related courses. And just as a heads up, again, when I talk about the letters, there were a community letter with 18 associations in support of these changes. So where does that leave us? Okay, Mike. We have two pieces of legislation, and we have and then a couple weeks ago, the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee held a hearing, not a markup, just a hearing about why these technical corrections are needed. The ones that we didn't have anybody from higher ed that speak to it. The only one that was really kind of as close to student centric was Student Veterans of America, and they spoke a lot about rounding out and the policy and the fact that the current policy that the institutions have to follow, and it could be really detrimental to the springtime students that are scheduled to graduate in the spring. So that's kind of the impetus to try to get something done sooner rather than later. Because again, this could impact their housing, their ability to graduate, all that kind of stuff. And so that was, and so again, we included that in the community letter. And where we are is literally the hope was that we wrote this little community letter in support of these possible changes are in these two pieces of legislation. We did not mention any preference in regards to how it should be paid for it. I'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit, and kind of what we think is going to be the final outcome, how it's going to be. But we really requested that to be brought to the floor by Veterans Day and past, at worst Thanksgiving, because again, this will impact the ability for veterans to enroll and be able to register for the classes for the springtime. So the clock is kind of ticking on this, and so we continue to monitor on a almost daily basis. I got kind of an update. Basically, with our hope is that the four corners are trying to kind of bring resolution specifically. Again, there's no issue on the technical corrections, it's how they're going to pay for it. And when I say the four corners, that means the staff from the Senate, majority and minority, and then the staffing, committee staff from the House majority and ranking member. So just want to kind of hopefully that the four corners will sit down and chat this week and to kind of resolve their differences. The concept is, we know that it's subject to the Senate 60 vote filibuster. So as a result, the offsetting funds are most likely going to make the day. This is one of the few areas left in Congress where there's like bipartisanship regarding veterans. And it's kind of interesting that we're kind of at a roadblock. And so while it may pass the House with the emergency funding, it won't pass the Senate because the Senate staff are going to require the offset, and they won't be able to bypass the 60 vote requirement. So we're literally keeping an eye on a bipartisan version of the bill to possibly be on the House suspension calendar for next week. Meaning House suspension calendar means that it's on the schedule, and by both next week, again, hopefully before Thanksgiving, as we have been adamant that this could impact veterans for the spring semester. So again, there are no policy concerns. The big thing that's holding this up right now that we are tracking, and I mentioned that coalition of higher ed, and we're making our calls, is how it's going to be paid for. So that is kind of the update how we've been engaged and how we continue to be engaged. And again, as Rock mentioned, we're conscious that so many of the veteran support services are housed in the registrar's office. So this is definitely on our radar, veterans issues. So with that, let me and just do a quick plug for something. We have something called an Eye on Washington, and folks aren't familiar with it. It's a kind of a monthly kind of synopsis of that the government relations team kind of is tracking here or important to higher education. It's there, it's a couple pages of just like one paragraph of issues. And if you're interested in receiving it, you feel free. Here's the to join. There's the link to the listserv. So I'll put in a plug to that. And Michelle and I are always available to the AACRAO members. We are here to serve you. And so that's our email addresses. So please feel free to reach out at anytime we can be of service.
Great. Just as a reminder, you can put any questions or comments you have in the Q&A or in the chat. If it's something that might require a little bit more nuance, feel free to use the raise hand function or the little button on your dashboard, and I'll unmute you in the order that the hand was raised. And we have a few questions and a few comments in chat also. I don't know which you'd rather start with.
Doesn't matter. I'm good.
So I'll just start with Q&A. Nicole Wingett asks, has there been any discussion on removing the discrepancy in housing allowance for online versus seated education?
That's supposed to be resolved by this fall coming up. So as you guys remember, when the Forever GI Bill went into effect, the whole zip code and housing thing became a hot mess. And I watched a hearing where I've never seen anybody dragged through the mud as the VA was by both parties. So it's a IT issue, obviously, but that is supposed to be in place starting in the fall of 2022. And has there any movement on the overwhelming reporting requirements with 8515? Yeah, like literally, I was just having a conversation with NAVPA and NACUBO and ACE. And so and as I kind of mentioned to both Rock and Phil, it's frustrating for everybody because they keep moving the goalposts. And they're really trying to create all this other stuff for just one or two actors that are trying to get around the 8515. Specifically, I heard of an aviation school out in Utah, and I'm just again, rumor mill, so don't quote me or anything, that basically they would only have 10 students, but their tuition is $80,000 a year. So they would have 8 veterans be able to use their GI Bills and benefits for it, but then would give scholarships to 2 other individuals, and then would forgive them. So under record, it would look like they met 8515, but they're just circumventing the overall process in order to be able to get those funds.
And this one was in chat and Bill put it in the Q&A. But is there any guidance on this portion of section 1018, which looks like 9 IX, any conditions or additional requirements, including training, experience, or examinations required to obtain the license, certification, or approval for which the course of education is designed to provide preparation?
I haven't seen anything, but I'll ask around.
Sure thing. And then another one, is VA once planning to make any updates to allow institutions to report student enrollment verifications in batches?
So that's part of what AACRAO work group was trying to make recommendations on, and that's a recommendation that institutions be able to report to the VA in the same manner that they're able to report in batches for Title IV to the Department of Ed. So my understanding from conversations is that VA receive its IT funding in one lump sum, And they've got a priority list, the top one being this housing issue that they've been trying to fix for a couple of years. And it's really an issue of just where does VA ones come up on that list? And so I think there are discussions, but it's just where in the priority list is that. But I know that the VA is having all kinds of IT modernization issues.
I'm sure. Now I'm going to move over to chat here. Is there any update on the funding for VA to modernize or replace VA once to allow schools to report? Oh, wait, that's sorry. That was any guidance on these two items from section 2 of section 1018? And this one is different from before. During a 1-month period, makes 3 or more unsolicited contacts to a covered individual via phone, email, or in person, or engages in same-day recruitment and registration.
Mike, where is that? I don't see that.
That one is from Daniel Weber in chat, timestamped at 2:31.
Okay, let me go to chat. $232, you said?
2:31.
Okay.
Daniel Weber.
No, I don't. Again, I'll check around them regarding. Mike, do me a favor. After this, let's take some of the questions that we can follow up with and put them in a document, and I'll start asking around more specifically.
Sure thing. Yep, I'll save a chat log and we'll try to kind of collate those questions and we'll update that to everyone that registered. I'm going to move back over to Q&A here. Are you aware of recent technical changes to VA once that no longer allow SCOs to amend and SCOs, let's say, second step? There was a previous adjustment on the enrollment certification. This has created additional steps within the dual certification process, adding another layer of workarounds.
No, I had not heard. I had not heard about that. That's another one. Definitely another question to put on the doc.
Sure. I saw a hand raised. If you did want to unmute yourself, feel free to raise your hand and I'll make sure you're unmuted. Next question from Rhonda. Many institutions filled out the Isakson AACRAO waiver. Is there any guidance or templates on what compliance should look like, specifically for the individualized shopping sheet?
No.
I will jump in there. Our ELR strongly recommended we request a waiver, even though we felt like we were mostly in compliance. So for what that's worth, and it's probably the same answer everyone else got, but we did fill out the waiver because our ELR strongly recommended we fill out the waiver.
Yeah, and same. We got the same guidance from our ELR as well. And in fact, I was looking through some of my emails here. We have another question out related to this that we're still waiting on an answer on, and I can share that, Rhonda, when we get it.
Great. And then another one from the Q&A area. Has the VA study abroad approval process changed nationwide?
Phil or Rock, do you guys know? I'm not sure.
I'm not aware of that one.
All right. Now, apologies. I'm going to work through the chat as best I can here and try to see if there's things that we haven't addressed.
I'll jump in and talk just for a minute while you're looking.
There
was one comment on Army Ignited and the additional burden that is placed, and just know whoever made that comment, we're in the same boat there as well. That has really significantly increased the workload on our SCOs, even though it's not a part of VA benefits specifically. Our office also handles the tuition assistance through those groups. Again, significant workload increase for the person that's doing that. So on top of, we're venting now, we're sharing that we're, Bill is certainly the expert when it comes to dealing with the legislators and our advocates across the hill. But for the rest of us, Philip and I are the practitioners. We're in the same boat you're in. And we really want to make sure everyone realizes we're trying to keep this at the forefront of AACRAO, keep it at the forefront of the AACRAO staff, and hopefully continue to push the issues because they're affecting us the same way they are you. So, but yeah, Army Ignited, that comment, we're dealing with the same increase in reporting and burden that's putting the other burdens we were getting in our institution, the additional requirements that our SSA requested for catalog approvals. There was a significant increase in some of the stuff they were asking for there. So we've continued to deal with increased workloads in addition to things like Isakson Road. So it's not one simple issue. It's everything together. And then you start talking about VA once and the issues with it, and it dog piles, just continues to pile on.
And one of the things that we discussed, and I'll share it now as a heads up, one of the things that we discussed with Bill and the board was in order to better advocate, right, we need to continue to keep our ears to the street, so to speak, on what the exact issues are. So not making a promise, but hopefully we can get this done. We had talked about sending out another survey just so we can be aware. So when Bill is having these conversations, he can accurately articulate what the exact pain points are for our membership.
And yeah, so I'll jump here. Question/comment from Paul Parker. As far as the current rounding out policy, how do you interpret it regarding general education level courses? And he just kind of specifies here that many majors are very specific now and do not have class options in the upper level major requirements to allow a student to even pick a class they haven't yet taken to round out. So can they take a general ed class that was an option in their degree program according to the catalog? So I guess kind of a practice question.
So I think that's what the legislation is trying to fix, to go back to provide the additional flexibility, because the way that the changes happen on August 1st, final semester, to be able to round out, that must be in their major, regardless what the major type of, so whatever that major may be, it must be within that major. And I think that's what has a lot of folks worried as we start going towards the spring semester and registration and all that stuff, and benefits, housing. So that's a major portion of the fix, and provide that additional flexibility.
That's great. And then a question from Elizabeth. Have you received concern regarding the change with Ask VA in providing personal info to a third party for login?
No.
All right, that's an easy one. And another section 1018 compliance question, or if we have guidance for it anyway, from Jim. Prior to the enrollment of a covered individual in a course of education at the educational institution, provide the individual with a form that contains information personalized to the individual that describes. Or go ahead. Yeah.
So regarding any of these issues, I will, put together the document and then absolutely look to reach out to some of our sisters, especially the folks at MAPPA, because they're probably grappling with all these issues as we speak. If I haven't seen any guidance on regarding that, but I know 1018 is an issue. But again, all the guidance that we're getting, especially around 8515, keeps changing. So they're changing the goalposts and changing the rules as they go. And I know that's been a huge frustration point for SEOs and institutions.
Yeah.
As we continue to read through these, there are several things in there I'm not positively answering on, but I'm making notes, and I think we're going to continue to look into them as we can advocate for everyone.
Yeah, and I mean, there's some comments here, but I think we've gone through, and luckily people in the chat are being helpful about filling in some info that we don't have necessarily, but I don't see any new questions or info. Actually, there's two in there. So George asks, historically, there's been a lot of turnover at the VA. Are you seeing any stability that might enable some of these topics for improvement to get some traction?
So I can answer that one on just our personal level. We were able to finally get an assigned ELR when we didn't have one for about 6 or 8 months. So for our specific situation, that brought stability, but I don't know about across the board. But we were without an ELR for our state for almost 6 months, and we were using an ELR that was responsible for several others. So that's a more specific situation at Clemson.
No.
Yeah, and
So-
for us, we've been leaning a lot on our SAA, our ELR, and then really it's been a lot of what we're doing right now. Just trying to tune in and sign up for whatever open forums, whatever webinars or coffee breaks to kind of bounce ideas off of one another to see, figure out how we best interpret this. Unfortunately, when we ask some questions, we get a lot of we don't know yet, right? Or use your best judgment, unfortunately.
Yep, I saw Kathleen Foxheim just sent in the Q&A anyway, a link to a survey in regards to 8515. So I'm going to link that in chat, but thanks to her. If you did not receive that email. And then Jan, kind of a side.
Yeah, and I saw the Belinda, she's talking about the expenses. So you'll now be able to use what you guys use for estimated expenses that you guys provide to Department of Education. Instead of, it's going to be whatever you guys do there, you're able to do it for VA as well. Because we were concerned from Belinda speaking about individualized estimates for living expenses. Yeah, because there are so many variables and it changes from semester to semester.
And yeah, to clarify, thanks, Susan, that survey is from NAPA. So you need to be a member to fill that survey out. But
it's a specific question there to me. I was just going to throw out the question was, how do you get the other ELR to assist you? They assigned that person. So the person from the other state was assigned to us, but getting response was almost impossible because their workload was so great. So the question was, how did we get another ELR to assist us when we didn't have one? Technically, we didn't have one assigned just to us. We were assigned someone else who already had a workload. So it was a rough 6 or 8 months.
Yeah, the NAPA survey was insightful to say the least. I even read a couple where we were like people had open-ended comments, and the most telling was our institution's considering getting out of the supporting veterans altogether because of all the requirements, and it's just so time prohibitive. I think if that starts getting the case, I think people will. There'll definitely be changes.
Still just scanning through.
But I also would encourage everybody, engagement in this issue is probably really important, especially for the whole, as student veterans start enrolling for the spring semester. If you haven't done so already, reach out to your government relations individual and see if there could be any letters written from your institution, the president, to your senators and also your representative to, and also if a member of Congress from your state, doesn't have to be your specific member, from your state, sits on the Veterans Affairs Committee, to let them know that how, as an institution from their state, this is important and it could impact student veterans' ability to enroll and get their access to benefits. And to encourage the leadership in both the House and Senate to move quickly because students could be impacted.
Yeah, and I see some more venting in chat and Q&A, which is sometimes healthy, but I don't know if you guys can see any specific questions that we haven't addressed already.
Just a comment, they're talking about the ELR and communications. And again, Philip mentioned this, our state approving agency has been an advocate for us. We've been able to work with them, still having to report a good bit of information to them, and the workload's pretty large, but they have been our advocate throughout it, and we've been happy to have them help us. But it's been a challenge for all of us.
And Bill gave some really great advice about how members can continue to get involved on this issue. And we just want to encourage you to do that. Keep the dialogue. We'll do our best to keep the dialogue open and to share information as it becomes available. And I just want to take a moment to thank Mike for his technical expertise in getting this done. And Bill, thank you for always advocating on our behalf. You do a very, very important job for the membership and our ability to get things done. And we know a lot of times you've prevented some things from happening that we don't even always know about. So thank you and your team for your efforts.
It's hearing from practitioners and this type of things is important. And that's getting, sometimes GR is making sure that some things don't happen. And that's just as effective of making things happen sometimes. I always like to say that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. But sometimes the unintended consequences are not what we want. And I apologize for my new arrival into the house. He is a beagle, as you just heard, and packages are delivered or something comes by, he lets people know that he's protecting the house. But thank you. It's a pleasure to represent the AACRAO constituency and their interests, and your guys' insights on how legislation or regulatory requirements will impact not only institutions but students is it's a critical voice. So it's my honor.
And yeah, just for people that joined a little bit late, we are recording this. So the whole thing's been recorded. You can use the same link you used to access this live to watch the recording. It usually takes about 30 minutes for Zoom to process it. And from there, you'll be able to access the chat log in addition to an audio transcript. But if you missed it for any reason, or you want to forward it to other people, you can just send them to the website and they can register and watch the recording on demand there.
All right.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. And again, also just echoing Philip, Bill Gill, Michelle Mott, our legislative team, they're awesome. They do so much, and Mike as well. So we really appreciate the AACRAO staff and the work they're doing. So.
Again, if anybody has any questions or anything, please feel free to send me an email and we'll start putting all this stuff together. Thanks, Mike, for being the technical support guru.
No problem, guys. Thanks for joining. Thanks for presenting and putting everything together. Have a good day, everybody.
All right, guys.
Thanks,
Thanks everyone.